Welcome everybody to our lived experience practice and governance webinar this morning. I'm really thrilled to be here this morning as your MC. My name's Belinda McCullough and my role at Mind is the Executive Director of Victorian Operations, and my pronouns are she, her. We'd of course like to start the session today with our acknowledgement of country, and I'm going this morning to read out the acknowledgement, which is from our lived experience, from the Lived Experience Governance Framework. So Mind acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we work, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognise the ongoing intergenerational impacts of invasion, dispossession and colonisation, and the strength and resilience of First Nations peoples and their custodianship of lands, waters, languages, knowledge and culture. Mind supports the sovereignty and self-determination of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We, of course, would also very much today like to recognise people with lived and living experience of mental health challenges and value their expertise, strengths and skills. So today, we're really thrilled to be here to launch the models and framework which have been informed by the Healing Place design process that offer lived experience-led approaches to practice and governance. I've had the great pleasure at Mind of joining the lived experience team and leaders at Mind in many working groups and workshops that have developed our own Mind approach in terms of lived experience governance and of course connection and community, which we'll talk a little bit further about. And certainly for myself, that's been an incredible learning experience and something that continues to, in a very real way, I think, inform all of our work at Mind as we proceed forward with the many services that we offer. All right, to get into the detail of today, just a couple of things to let you know. We're recording the session today and that will be emailed through to people after the session. We are taking questions, so please put them into the Q&A. We will hold them until the end of the session where we hope to have a little bit of time to step through those. In terms of the documents that we're launching today, they will be made available after the session today, and we'll talk you through where and how to get access to those as a reminder at the end. But to kick us off with some welcoming comments today, I'm really pleased and delighted to introduce Mary O'Hagan, who many of you will know, who is Victoria's Executive Director of Lived Experience from the Department of Health. So over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Belinda, and it's great to be here. And I just want to congratulate Mind on these two important pieces of work, the lived experience practice and the governance frameworks, which really, to a large degree, have emerged out of the Healing Place development work. Now, most of you will know that the Healing Place comes from an interim a recommendation in the Royal Commission interim report, and the Lived Experience branch has been tasked with the development of this initiative. When I arrived at the department nearly 3 years ago, someone showed me the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And I was really fascinated that all the verbs across the spectrum, barring one, denoted the actions of the more powerful actor in the engagement process. Words like inform, consult, involve and empower, and I think collaborate was the only one that didn't betray this. And I was struck by this and felt that after 30 years of participation or engagement policy, going back, I think, to the first mental health plan in the early 90s, it was time to lift our game another notch. So in the lived experience branch, we made the shift from participation to engagement, or engagement to partnership. So when it comes to the Healing Place development work, the lived experience branch from the start, we've done our best with some pitfalls, I guess, to make this a genuine partnership rather than a traditional engagement approach. And that was in phase 1 as well as phase 2. Well, I've discovered that partnership is not always easy. But they need to be built on trust and the use of relational rather than just transactional approaches. And, we're doing this in the context that communities do not always have high trust for the institutions of the system. And so partnerships require all the partners perhaps to revise their traditional assumptions and habitual approaches to power and the other. For some partners, it will mean yielding some power, like the department, and for others, it will mean recognising and responsibly using the greater power they may have in the partnership. I think also partnerships allow a bigger glimpse into the world of our partners. And this may mean that the partners need to adjust some long-held preconceptions about the other. That happens much more readily than in an engagement approach. But as well as trust, a partnership requires shared purpose, a commitment to equity on many levels, and effective processes for maintaining the relationship, shared decision-making, and getting the business done, which is pretty important. We also need a shared understanding of the boundaries to partnership too. So from the start, the Healing Place project, the department has tried to work differently from the usual engagement approach. In phase 1, before we entered into a service agreement, and in phase 2, development after Mind and Alfred, with the Alfred won the tender. And the partnership, imperfect as is between Mind, the Alfred, the department and consumers, I think it's been demonstrated in a number of ways. I think there's been a commitment from all partners to transparency, flexibility and shared decision making. And in fact, I think that the Majority Consumer Governance Board has meant that decision making has been sort of that the consumers there have had an advantage by numbers in the decision making. The department tried to be flexible in the funding agreement to meet the needs of a project as it unfolded. So the documents today weren't a deliverable in the tender. Instead, we just wanted to create the space for the project to focus on whatever it needed to. And I think the Fidelity Group told us we needed to protect against peer drift following Mind's visit to New Zealand. So we needed to just, in the agreement with Mind, just sort of open up that space and not get controlling about it. Mind and the department, we've established a joint governance group with a majority of consumers on it. And we've had a collaborative approach to resolving issues. I mean, one of the really interesting ones has been the anti-ligature issue, and I think that resulted in a robust piece of work led by Chris Maley for Mind, and I think that has resulted in something quite interesting. And of course, we've been collaborating in resolving the capital acquisition issues, which are ongoing. And so this has been a partnership in action. And from our perspective, it's worked well. And it's really interesting when you get tensions in the partnership, like the anti-ligature issue, where the department has a fairly risk-averse role and the people in Mind are trying to really stretch the boundaries. I think that's led to novel ways of solving a problem, and something that probably wouldn't happen so readily in a traditional engagement approach. So we feel we've learnt from this partnership, and we're trying to make improvements all the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks for sharing your reflections on the process. That's really, really interesting to hear, so thank you. So it's now time to launch these exciting and groundbreaking pieces of work that we really hope and believe can support transformation and are already, I think, so led by lived experience. To do so, I'd like to welcome Mind's Chief Executive Officer, Jill Callister. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Belinda, and thank you, Mary. I want to thank you for the partnership that we have with you and the division and the department, and thank you for your leadership. I think your appointment and role in the department is really critical to transformation of Victoria's mental health system. So just wanted to recognise that. So this project has provided an incredible opportunity for Mind to step further into our commitment as a leader in lived experience, to drive new ways of thinking, being and doing, informed by lived expertise. To now be part of supporting the development and trial of lived experience-led and governed services is exciting and built on a very long legacy of investment and commitment to change, driving change, informed by those most impacted. When Mind, in partnership with the Alfred Mental Health and Addiction Service, was successful in our bid to lead the development of Victoria's first lived experience residential service, which we now call the Healing Place, we knew we had a unique opportunity, one that would not only inform the design of one service, but set the terms for lived experience-led service delivery and governance, and have the opportunity to contribute to reform across the broader service system. So, as Belinda said, today we are launching two foundational documents that offer a new lived expertise-led practice and governance approach for the continued innovation of lived experience-led service models. These will serve the Healing Place when it's operational, but can also be applied across all lived experience-led services. The first one, Connection and Community, transformative lived expertise-led approaches, provides a conceptual framework for lived expertise-led practice, one that is grounded in human rights, social justice, and centres love, compassion and connection. It is unapologetically peer, and we believe has the chance to genuinely hold and transform through relational approaches to healing. The second, Mind's Lived Experience Governance Framework, is based on the National Lived Experience Governance Framework and mapped against our current governance processes. It is supported and endorsed for trial across lived experience-led and centred services by our board. It centres the people most impacted within decision-making and sets a process for reconceptualising approaches to risk, quality and accountability through a lived experience lens. We really could not have achieved what we have without the partnership of the Lived Experience Leadership and Advocacy Network, LELN, who have walked alongside our lived experience and senior leadership to shape this process and explore the change and commitment required to bring these to life. I also want to acknowledge our project partners, the Alfred Mental Health and Addiction Service, who have supported our approach, been humble and curious in how they work with us to achieve change. And I would like to recognise the many consumer leaders across the sector, experts in their area of knowledge, as well as by experience, who have deeply and generously committed their time, their energy and their heart to develop these groundbreaking documents. As well as the families and the carers, the Indigenous people, cultural, queer and many other leaders and change makers who have contributed to this work. It has been a genuine collaborative partnership across many people contributing. So as we go forward, we want to acknowledge the continued commitment of the Minister for Mental Health and the Premier to the full and complete implementation of the Healing Place in line with the commitments of Recommendation 5 of the Royal Commission. And as proud as we are of the work we are launching today, it will only reach potential by the investment in full and complete trial and development of lived experience-led crisis alternatives. And we remain absolutely confident that we will get there. Our vision is that as we implement these frameworks, the services that sit within them become the future of a reformed and transformed system. And it is Mind's great privilege to lead our part in this journey. And now to hear more about the detail in the documents, I'm delighted to welcome Mind's Executive Director of Lived Experience, Katie Larson, and the CEO and founder of Lellin, Ellie Hodges, a great friend and colleague of ours here at Mind, to share with you more about the development and need for this work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jill, and thanks to Mary also for your comments. So yes, Ellie and I will share a little bit more about how we went from the original call for the Healing Place, Victoria's first lived experience residential service as a crisis alternative, to where we've landed, which is obviously supporting the development of that service, but also a much broader framework around practice and governance for lived experience-led models. So the Healing Place beginnings, as Jill mentioned, we have a fantastic partnership with Alfred Mental and Addiction Health, and having strong partnership has been core to this work. One of the fundamental aspects with the Healing Place that differs from a lot of other models that we've seen previously is that the NGO partner was the lead, and I think that was a foundational piece in terms of the power dynamics and the direction of the project. The project presents a unique opportunity for transformation, and that has not escaped us in any moment as we've gone through this work, and I think has kept us core to what's important and kept us focused on the challenge and determined when we encounter barriers and thinking and framing how we might progress. This project asks big questions, as I think indeed the entire Royal Commission did, in terms of reconceptualising concepts of risk and safety and offering non-coercive models. These things don't happen organically in a system that is built very differently to one that would enable really consumer-led models of risk and safety and non-coercive, non-restrictive environments. So with our process, we've always kept in mind, how do we respond to those unique challenges and proactively address them? One of the ways was to, as Mary mentioned, to build consumer leadership fidelity into governance. So our executive governance group had a 51% minimum for consumer leadership, and we had a consumer fidelity group, which was 100% consumer leaders, and allowed us to thrash out ideas in that space in a totally focused consumer space that could give us kind of a framework to take back to the broader executive governance. We also had a focus on those most impacted in our design processes and centred intersectionality in that also, which I'll talk a bit more about. As Jill mentioned, a range of people who we can't mention everyone, but we will acknowledge in parts through this presentation, contributed into this process. And I strongly believe that, you know, a process like this, a project like this, an opportunity like this is not just about Mind, it's not just about Mind and Armour. It's about building on decades of collective knowledge, wisdom and insight, and transforming that opportunity in something that can genuinely make a difference. And to do that, you have to ensure that you're always engaging people who are the experts in what they do, that you're listening, that you're humble, and that you see it as a collaborative and collective process. And I think that is honouring the spirit of the consumer movement in the way that we work. In terms of, I just wanted to share these are some quotes from the Healing Place design workshops, but really just capture some of the key reasons why we need lived experience-led models to be developed. You can see some of these quotes that were generously shared here. About being to hospital 10 times and never receive care or referral, just rejection. There's themes that it's all about containment. There's no place that anyone feels understood. and a need to go somewhere where there isn't a fear-based response. So these are times, anytime we kind of felt the shift and the tension and the pull away from the transformation, we could come back to these kinds of comments and understand there's a desperate need for change here, and we need to honour that in our approach. So in terms of lived experience-led services at Mind, we do have a number that either previously have operated, are currently operating, or we hope will be operating in the future in the Healing Place. And from those services, we've learnt a lot. They have produced exceptional outcomes, but they're in many cases poorly funded, and mostly don't have the structures and supports around them to enable their process to operate it with its intention. So they're largely operating in environments, contexts, frameworks, and particularly around practice and governance that aren't defined by lived experience leadership, and as such create natural tension. So that was something that we were kind of learning from previous and really noticing and thinking about, well, in the Healing Place model and future lived experience-led models, how do we support frameworks and structures that can help them to thrive honestly and openly in the heart of what they do? And I'll hand over to Ali to speak a bit about.
And some of how we modelled up the learnings from peer-led services was through work that Lelyn and Mind did in partnership in Adelaide's North several years ago for a hospital avoidance program called Connect SA. And Lelyn's role at that time was a developmental evaluation of the Connect service, walking beside very closely with the team with weekly and fortnightly reflections and other deep dives around practice to really shape a service model that was impactful, and trying to understand what it was about peer-led practice and service delivery that is most important. And on the right-hand side of this slide, we have the elements that were proven through that process, and we feel it stands for all peer-led services. The commitments in the middle: connection, agency, and innovation. It's lived experience everywhere, all levels, the expertise of it, designing for maximum impact and not being afraid to adapt, adjust, pivot, go where the evidence is pointing you to be successful with the people that you're supporting. It needs investment, time, relationship. It's not just monetary investment that's required. Knowing that collaboration across disciplines is helpful for the peer workforce, but we heard from clinicians the impact on them and their own practice by working so closely with peers. Priority on reflection, adaptation. The values of peer work need to be modelled in how that peers are supported within organisations as well. And that learning has brought us through this process of developing governance and practice for the Healing Place as well.
So some of you may have heard me talk about this concept before, but one of the things that we really learnt and noticed when we were looking at international models around lived experience-led services, when we were looking at our own lived experience-led models, and we're looking at just generally lived experience work within the current mental health system. And one of the things we identified was a concept called the clinical ceiling, which think of it like the glass ceiling, only above the ceiling is clinical approaches to mental health support dominated by a biomedical model. And the challenge of the clinical ceiling is it means that lived experience-led services are also held in ways that at a certain point of leadership for that service, it differs into the broader operations, systems of clinical governance. These types of processes naturally invalidate lived experience-led wisdom, knowledge and insight, as well as other forms of insight and wisdom and knowledge, such as First Nations, queer and multicultural communities and collectivist cultures. So then there's a need to really understand and address how do we actually break through the ceiling and build different forms of support, structure, accountability, quality and safety that can hold lived experience-led approaches. To do that, we also need to acknowledge the very powerful force of the status quo and ask questions about why are things the way they are in the system? Is it because of legislation and regulation, or is it a way that that legislation and regulation has been interpreted or applied? Or is it based on historical responses to risk, where we've got nervous or tried to correct or overcorrect an issue that has occurred within service delivery? So really understanding how the force of the status quo pulls us back into assuming, expecting and demanding things be a certain way, and how do we question that in our process, which has been fundamental to our work in this space. And to do that, we also have to acknowledge fear. When we are working in the spaces of the new, when we are trying to challenge and transform, it is very, very uncomfortable work. And sitting in spaces of fear and discomfort is part of the work. I've sat in so much discomfort over the last couple of years, and we've talked a lot about that within our work and partnership with Leland, around how do we hold that for ourselves, and how do we hold that together. And absolutely, we do it together. And that's not only for those of us working in lived experience leadership, but of course for our allies as well. But I think when we don't name this, we just fall into it, and we kind of subject to it, rather than really understanding that it's core to the work and it's an expected part of it. So I just want to touch on another aspect that's really informed the design of these documents. So within our Healing Place development work, we were totally committed to designing with those most impacted, and that included intersectional design. So we had a consumer design team who went through 4 half-day workshops to design the service experience of the Healing Place. They represented a range of cultures, backgrounds, queer identities, First Nations, disability and faith, as well as rural and regional. And that was really foundational for us, because we know that often that's the kind of forgotten aspect and built in later. They also, brought in a range of service use and lived experience. So we were really seeking people that met the types of people that we hope the Healing Place will support. People who hadn't been able to access acute inpatient environments, or who had experienced involuntary admission, seclusion and restraint, poor experiences of acute care due to lack of cultural, physical or sexual safety. The team that we worked with were incredible and brought a broad range of lived experiences, which they shared generously and honestly across a whole range of areas relating to their trauma, to their history, to their home, and to their actual experiences around mental health and crisis. Through those 4 half days, a service pathway was mapped that held at its centre the heart and the experience that would shape a different type of care. They would see something that offered something different to those quotes we saw before, and genuinely offered not only support through the Healing Place, but a model for transformation across the mental health system. And we asked them to imagine what that might look like. And here are some of the things they shared with us. A place where I'm allowed to express distress and work through trauma and pain. A place where showing my pain and trauma is not used against me, but is instead seen as a strength, where I have a voice. What it is like to connect with peer workers and to feel and heard and just feel witnessed in their experience. Hand back to you, Ali.
As we went on this endeavour together to think about how do we actually bring this dream to life of operating and working and practicing in different ways, the Mind team and Leland worked together on a theory of action to think about what are the outcomes if we do this right, and what are the practices and ways of being and showing up and connecting with people that are most relevant. And this is the theory of action that we developed. Within that, we had to think about the different groups we needed to consider: people that use their lived experience and peer-led services or are involved in decision-making, the lived experience peer workforce and leaders, management and leadership, including the board at Mind, because they have a role and a responsibility, and our partners and the broader sector as well. And you'll see that those groupings have flowed through to the governance framework that Mind are launching today. And I won't go into the detail because time is of the essence and there's a lot of information here, but it really speaks that the leading by example was important to Mind, people at the centre, true and genuine alternative and systems transformation was always on the cards that led us and guided us and grounded us along the way. Within this, something that Leland had done previously in South Australia was a philosophy of care for an alternative to ED setting that has been adopted elsewhere. This gave us another grounding and a consideration as we developed the connection and community framework that will be at Mind as well. It's been a different way of thinking about service provision. Instead of thinking about what the offer is, it was flipped to really consider what is the experience that people expect and have the right to receive when they seek support from people. It's written very differently to usual and had some structures there about what is valued, why that is valued, what it means is seen in service delivery and support, and what it means people will experience. And that became our connection point through this work as well.
So for us, connection and community pushes the boundaries because it's then about taking those models and making it lived experience led and leaning to the full possibility and fidelity of that. Foundational to connection and community, you can see the model there on your right, which talks about each of the pillars that operate under it, as well as the core aspects that sit outside it, which commit to systems transformation, justice, and social change. For us, it was about centering an approach within connection and community that locates mental health experiences as interconnected with the socio-cultural and political experience of people's lives, rather than seeing those as parallel to or separate from. It seeks to radically repair and disrupt the impacts of a broken mental health system that locate the source of the problem within the individual. And it offers ways of working with and alongside people in some of the worst and hardest times of their lives that are grounded in love, compassion, and connection, that understand the context of trauma, and that recognise that very often when we're in distress, it is our heart, mind, body, and soul's best way of protecting us. So how do we work with and support people from that perspective? And connection and community is designed for, in those moments, in those tensions, in those moments of pull to the status quo, that we have a really strong, clear philosophical framework that can guide teams and lived experience-led models, and more broadly over time, to really hold their practice.
If the philosophy of care, and for a time at Mind, what we were working on was known as the philosophy of healing, became the community and connection, that's the heart. We knew for the heart to be fully enabled, we needed a structure to be embedded to support it and bring it fully to life with accountability and responsibility and a commitment to hold steadfast when things get tricky or hard, or we wonder what we are doing, because there's been moments like that along the way. We knew through that we needed an authorising environment as well that was written and could be a return to place. And that led to knowing that a lived experience governance framework was needed. Mind already had a practice and clinical governance framework, and Leland had worked by being commissioned by the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum, and Malene, the lived experience governance framework. We melded them together into Mind's lived experience governance framework, which this is partly all about today.
And I'll just comment briefly on that to say, I think working with our executive and board on this has been really foundational. We also recognise that what we've actually produced through the work of the national framework and then how it's applied at Mind really offers a human rights and social justice model, not a health model. And it was one of Mind's board directors that actually said, you know, this is what we need to think about and how we work. There's a lot for us to work through and think through in the application of that. But it provides us with a framework to start in how we genuinely centre the person, not the practitioner of the organisation, when responding to risk and safety, and how we hold those types of processes in our organisation. I know we are, I will touch on this very, very briefly, because there's lots of information and we're short on time, but just to show on the left, we can see how the elements of connection and community and lived experience governance come together and are held as one. And then on the right looks at how do we hold that in actual structural governance within the organisation through the forming of a lived experience committee, and how that flows through the framework, through connection and community, and into lived experience-led operating guidelines. And we also have a piece of relational risk mitigation work that we're developing as well that will support that reconceptualising of risk. So essential components of change, and I'll hand over to Ellie.
From what Katie has shared already, the importance of partnership is clear, and what Jill and Mary spoke to about that. But beyond partnership, we've needed allyship. So there's been people who are non-lived experience designated roles in positions of power and authority that have had to come on the journey and open pathways, share power and their platforms to enable some of this to get where it is. Without those things, we wouldn't have landed here, and the impact would be much less. We've had to allow the space for grappling. This was 18 months of work, of half-day and full-day workshops with Mind peer leaders and over half of the executive team being there as well. The at one time we joked about a KPI for nausea and insomnia, because that was how we were sitting in the discomfort, and it really, we had to work through it. And I don't believe there's any, if we had tried to do this on our own, we wouldn't have been able to get the depth and richness and robustness that has come. We've had to challenge power in the process in all ways, with the department, with partners as well, and within ourselves, and the dynamics in the rooms at times, and determining what expertise we preference. And it was always going back to consumer preferences and their rights and needs as well.
Investment and commitment has been critical. We did actually have funding to do this work, and as Mary alluded to, we had space and flexibility to see where the work took us. That takes also the commitment and the partnership of the department, but also all those involved, and is I guess a critical component in this, of needing time and needing investment for us to really conceptualise reform and transformation. It's not going to happen if we're constantly working to short timelines and within the constraints of the current system. We have to find and take moments for transformation when they occur. Mary spoke to the work that La Trobe led for us around the use of anti-ligature design in peer-based services, and really questioning, why are these things in place? What's the history of them? Do they have application here? And then doing the work to provide a different solution. And I think that's foundational to how we've tried to work throughout the project. One in, all in. It doesn't happen if you're working in silos. It doesn't happen if you can't hold multiple perspectives. It doesn't happen if you can't sit in the tensions of the whole organisation and also buy into that. So I think I'd really like to recognise our broader partnership, but also the courage of mind in this process also to engage in this journey. No, we're over time, so I'll be very quick here. Next steps, we're looking to test and trial these models as they are lived experience-led models that we have existing at Mind. That will be a piece of work that Leland will continue to support us with. Mary spoke to the Pathways to Healing Place delivery of the service, and they're underway. They're complex, but we will get there, and I'm really excited for how that looks ahead. And we also know how ourselves at Mind, within the department, across other organisations, we're able to apply the learnings across other projects and activities. And that's exactly why we're sharing this work now, so that we can make it public, that we can give opportunity for across the sector to learn and grow and be informed by this work, and hopefully support collective approaches to transformation. I'm not going to go through all of these dot points now, and I'm sure that I will have forgotten people. It probably would take another couple of slides, but this is just a massive thank you to the incredible work and contribution. It is extraordinary how much heart and time and expertise has been given to this project, and I don't have time to do it justice here, but thank you to all of you. You know who you are, and we are incredibly grateful. Before we finish and hand over to the aftercare team, I just want to read this poem, which was written by one of the consumer designers as part of the design workshops, which captures what we are trying to achieve and is as beautifully written. A place without bars on the windows, no obstacle course at the door, furniture not bolted down, a place with personality, to be, to heal, to grow, a chance at getting things manageable, a team that works with you, no forced options, no arguing for basic rights, a real chance at getting better. Thank you to Possum Life for those words. I will now hand over to the LGBTIQA+ aftercare team, Frankie, Rika and Alex, to talk a little bit about what this looks like in practice from the work that they do within that incredible program at Mind. Over to you, team.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Yes, I just want to start with an acknowledgement that we're on Wurrung land, and we acknowledge and extend our respects to any First Nations folk here today, as well as their elders past and present. We also want to acknowledge the role of ongoing colonisation and genocide in mental health, not just in this country, but across the world, in Palestine, Congo and Sudan, and many others. But also, striving to walk alongside First Nations folk to the ongoing resistance and the role ongoing resistance plays in mental health as well. Yeah, so I think should we like introduce ourselves? And yeah, so my name's Rika. I go by they them pronouns. I'm a peer practitioner here at Aftercare.
Thanks, Rika. I'm Alex. She, her pronouns. I'm a peer practitioner here as well.
And I'm Frankie, go by they, them, and I'm a narrative therapist here, counsellor at Aftercare.
Cool. Thank you again. That was just so delicious. And I think really important when we're thinking about, you know, not having power over in our relationships. And so I think that feels really important. So a little bit about Aftercare is I've been here for about 3 years. It's been sort of running for about 4, and it's a lived experience, a living experience workplace. So everyone here has thoughts and histories and the whatnot in relationship to suicide or not wanting to be alive. And we offer, I guess, like peer support towards the LGBTQIA+ community. And I think it's, why we're here today is I think speaking to like active models for this. And we've been running this all the way through COVID and growing all the way through as well, and learning kind of the active practice of how to enact healing in our relationships with each other and with the community that comes in and supports us. And so we do about like 10 sessions of peer work, and that might look like online work, or we often will go into nature and go for a walk, or sometimes we do outreach. I mean, it looks like, a session looks as just as many sessions as there are people in the world, I think, what can happen, and we like co-design, what that looks like with the community. And and I think we get like so many experiences of that, and Frankie's going to share a little bit of a story around something that's popped up in our work that really represents kind of the simplicity and the I want to say radical, but it shouldn't really be that radical.
No, I don't think so.
Loving, bringing love into spaces of healing. I think we really embody that a lot. So. What do you?
Oh, well, I will share a bit of a story. I'm really thankful to community member Jay, who has given his permission to be able to share this with all of you. And the story is called 3 Cheeses Pizza. Shout out to anyone who loves a 3 Cheeses Pizza. This one's for you. So I guess just before I tell this story, it's really kind of an invitation to think about risk and responses to suicide in a way, I guess, that is a little bit different to what we might kind of expect, or maybe the ways that we've been schooled within our traditions to respond. So Jay is 29. She uses all pronouns, she, her, and they, and identifies as gender ambidextrous. And at the time that Jay and I were working with each other, he was facing a lot of kind of pretty difficult contexts in his life. Criminal charge of public nuisance, or in their own words, attempted suicide, a missed court date, an arrest warrant, really limited supports, issues from a previous employer that were causing stress, and a lot of isolation in many different ways. And this story is from our second session together. And just keeping in mind, when I asked Jay about this, they really said, like, I wasn't really trusting you yet in this second session. And what I noticed was that words were really hard for Jay to access, even in answering questions or talking about their experience. And when I asked Jay about why words were really hard to come about, they mentioned it was because they felt so silenced by other services. And they reflected that both the services and themselves weren't understanding how each other were communicating, or even really how to communicate during a kind of experience of crisis or distress. But towards our session, Jay mentioned that he wasn't sure if he was going to be in the world to make it to our next session. And I'd spoken to her earlier in the session to kind of let her know, look, like aftercare responds a bit differently in terms of how we talk about suicide, how we respond to suicide, because Jay had mentioned that when previous services had called for a welfare check, this really wasn't helpful. So I just kind of said, you know, like, how would you like me to respond when you tell me that, you know, when you say that you won't be there for the next session? And Jay said, look, like, I'm just really sick of people not caring, just really sick of people not caring about me. And so then I went to my own experiences of what care is for me in my life. And I thought about just the kind of the things like food and sleep. So I asked Jay, you know, have you had any food or sleep in the last few days? And she said, look, I haven't had either. And so I just asked, like, Jay, do you like pizza? And I said, yeah, I like the ones with the 3 cheeses, but it needs to be gluten-free because I'm celiac. And so we agreed that maybe Aftercare could purchase an Uber Eats card so they could decide where to order their food from. And when I asked Jay about sharing this story here today, he said, even just the offer of food, I remember thinking, what the, like, someone actually cares. Like, usually the thing you're looking for when you reach out to friends is for them to show you that they care. But when it's really hard to care for yourself, the fact that someone else cares that you haven't eaten is just really nice. And Jay kind of reflected that this response from Aftercare spoke to this sense that, like, the workers at Aftercare, it's more than just a job. Like, we can go home and we can have our dinner and forget about our workday, but we can also think about what it means to be in relationship with people and to think about helpful and kind and compassionate and loving responses. And there was a kind of point during the conversation when we were talking about something that was really hard and really triggering. And I think I kind of mentioned, like, where do you feel safe? And the feeling for Jay at that moment was that safety was in the desert, and we were able to kind of speak about the desert as a metaphor and find some kind of relationship with safety. And Jay kind of mentioned that through being able to speak with Aftercare, that he was able to talk about the hard things without having to say them necessarily, because at that point, even when he was asking for help, she was being silenced. So it wasn't really safe to talk about their issues. And speaking about their issues in different ways made them realize that you can speak about wanting to die without ending up in hospital. And Jay kind of reflected that after this experience with Aftercare, she's figuring out ways how they can communicate to other services when they're leading up to becoming suicidal without using the words, I want to die, because most services hear that and really freak out. But I guess we kind of spoke about what it means at Aftercare that we can have these conversations about not wanting to be around, and what that actually, how that can actually strengthen meaningful relationships with people. And I think also something else that I just wanted to share here, that it was really significant for Jay to be able to have their story shared here, as they're also a peer worker, and they really feel like it was significant to be able to contribute in this way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story. Yeah. Of like the power of food and connection and community. It's really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like this is just kind of one story about ways that the peer practitioners, and then also the folks within the counselling allied health team, the way we try and think about risk really differently, or even just like care differently. And because each of us are also part of the community, where we're thinking about like how to invite people into that sense of belonging, and you know, that we're not just these blank slates, these neutral practitioners who just aren't affected at all by, you know, we see ourselves, and we see ourselves responsible for and are in connection with our community, you know.
And like also like the mutual relationship that we have with community, and like, you know, like it would have needed to trust Jay as well, and like, you know, that trust of like between like in your relationship as well, and Jay needing to trust you as well.
Because I feel like something we also sometimes speak about is like, you know, we have these conversations and we then, you know, finish the day and we're like, oh, we don't know. We hope we see this person again. And we also are trusting in their agency and trusting in their, you know, ability to make decisions in their own life, you know, and that is sometimes we sit in that uncertainty quite a lot, don't we?
Yeah, it's like I think we talk about it as like hope holding as a practice, and you know, really, you know, having to step into and learn precisely what it means to be holding hope in the face of unknown, in the face of like sitting with you know, fear or something that's coming up. It's like, oh, how can I be here? And then I don't know, the process itself like shows ways of how to move through that, and how to be stepping into hope with people. And I often think of it like I get to be like I think of a computer game save point or something. I can come in and be like, oh, I've made it to this kind of moment. And yeah, just offering that to someone, being that light, or that sense of connection, or care in what can be a desert or a
and like the humanness of it all as well. I don't know, just like food being such a human thing. And yeah, like acknowledging, you know, that's just like kind of like what's happening with the systems around this person. And what like
because I don't think we speak about like, you know, oppression and systemic violence that people might be facing in their lives, but we don't often speak about like the violence and the abuse that like mental health services can kind of perpetuate, like the fact that they have been so silenced by being able to speak about their experience. Like there's really something that we need to, I feel like as folks working within mental health system, we need to respond to that context and think about why that's happening. Yeah,
just a little thing.
Where's the big question?
This feeling, this is how you got.
Cool.
Well, I think we could probably end on that.
Yeah. We could keep talking forever. You know, that's us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frankie, Alex, and Rika. And I hope you get a chance to read the chat messages. There's lots of beautiful messages there for you. And thanks to Jay also for sharing their story. And I really like those words, hope holding. And there was a few messages about that too. So yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and the amazing support you provide to people with this today. All right, there's so much we could talk about, and we have exactly 6 minutes, folks. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through. Probably the first one, I think, is one around power, and it's regarding challenging power. How have you found differentiating between the process of challenging power within yourself with challenging power within the system, positions, and other people. I don't know, Katie or Ellie, if you might want to speak to that.
I'm happy to initially. Really great question. I think reflecting on power is a constant and active process. I don't think you ever get to, or shouldn't ever get to, a point of resolution about it. I guess when you feel like you have some power and influence, you need to use it and try and understand how you use it best. And I think one of the things I find working within and as part of the consumer and the lived experience movement and as part of the queer community, as well as I think there is a accountability to something other than self that's really kind of core to thinking about power. And I think sometimes you can feel really hopeless and feel powerless. Like it's very easy in the nature of what we do to have days where you get up and think, oh, this is not going to happen. I can't see any way through. But I guess it's then how do we come back together to give each other strength, to build connection, and to acknowledge that there are ways through. It just takes time. And we have seen incredible change, and we can create more incredible change. And then I guess the other thing is to understand when it's time to step back and ensure that other voices, other perspectives are coming through. And as I said, it's a constant active process of reflection and shared accountability as well. Ellie, you might want to add to that.
I'd just add a couple of small things is when because I play on this individually and what's inside me, but leading an organisation where we often have the least power or less power than our partners, and even how that plays out. And for both things, I always come back to purpose and knowing why. And if we are really focused on that target, then that enables me to speak up when I'm shaky, when I want to run and I don't want to be there. And also remembering my privilege, because I do have access and some influence that I have to use, because there are other people that don't get to where we do and whose voices are silenced or dismissed or who have been lost along the way. And so it's knowing it's there and grappling and dancing with it internally as well. And lived experience makes us, we carry a lot of shit as well that makes us want to shrink and hide away. And it's how we do our own journey with recovery and healing to enable us to show up in the ways we need for the benefit of the movement and our communities.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Katie. I don't know, Mary or any of the aftercare team, would you like to add any comments to that? No? All good. All right. I think we've probably just got time for a final question, which was around the clinical, the anti-ligature tension, and how did you grapple with that, and how did you find a resolution that was lived experience led?
Well, I haven't quite got a resolution yet, which is, nature of this project. But we're in process. What I'd say is it was a key moment of transformation. I'll preface this by saying I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of anti-ligature design here. So just conscious for folks that I'm going to speak to that quite technically, just to provide context. So typically in acute inpatient environments, there's high levels of anti-ligature. Because of the nature of this service, the healing place is an acute alternative, the question of anti-ligature was raised. And for us, that was a point of key moments of transformation. Let's look into the status quo arrangements here and understand why and how they exist. And just a massive thank you to Chris Maley, Lisa Brophy and Piers Gooding and the team at La Trobe University, who have undertaken a significant research project looking internationally on this to understand through literature review and through interviews and through analysis against legislation the nature of anti-ligature use. And I think I am going to do justice to the research report to say the key finding is there is no evidence for its appropriate use within peer-led services, quite simply because they're not locked environments and they don't confiscate items. Saying all of that, so that is correct. We also heard repeatedly through the Fidelity Group, through the design processes, we saw Possum Life's poem there before. This is not what people want to walk into. It feels coercive. It feels dehumanising. And if we're genuinely going to centre consumer-led perspectives, evidence, knowledge and wisdom, then these are the moments that matter. Because for what one person is a slightly different variation on the types of furnishings that you have, for another person is dehumanising and distressing. So how are we going to listen to those voices? And you heard the aftercare team speak to what it's about. It's about connection and sitting with and exploration. And that's the model that we want to deliver in the Healing Place, is in place of things like anti-ligature and observations and all the systems that work there. Our relational risk approach is around connection and community and sitting with and being in the messiness of it and not running from the fear of that. So we don't have a resolution. We do have an incredible report from La Trobe that they will be publishing and we will be able to share, but we're working on it, and we're working on it in a very much a partnership approach. And I feel confident that wherever we land, we will be at the most consumer-led possible scenario that we can offer through the partnership work that we're doing.
Great, thank you, Katie. That's probably all the questions we have time for today. I just want to say I love the hearts coming up the screen. It's just absolutely beautiful, and I hope everybody can see those. I would like to add my congratulations to everybody who has worked on all of this work, incredibly led by Katie and the broader team, incredible partnership with Leland. I really encourage people to look up the documents. The links are in the chat. We'll be following up today with emails to people with the recording and links. And there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, which we will respond to today. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I haven't said that I should have. I would particularly like to thank the aftercare team for joining us too today and for everything you've shared. There's been beautiful words in the chat and lots of comments around humanity and genuineness and incredible contributions. So that's probably a great note to leave it on. Congratulations to all, and thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. Bye-bye.